You're with Julian on the Brown Note and a review of the incredibly maligned latest Hellboy film, The Crooked Man. I've said before that no one has ruined more films by not directing them than Del Toro. He refused to direct the Hobbit trilogy. He refused to direct the sequel to Pacific Rim, an amazing film. And he hasn't given us Hellboy 3. So the first two Del Toro directed Hellboy films have rightly been heralded as high watermarks of the visual fantasy realm. And Ron Perlman as the most loved version of the comic book character. I actually thought the Hellboy film that came out a few years ago and was trashed was a very maligned film, but there was a lot to the mess that I enjoyed. This, however, is a very different proposition given that was a very high budget film and this is a very low budget film. The director Brian Taylor's had an interesting career. He directed the two Crank films with his partner then, Mark Neveldine. These Jason Statham films are absolute manic gonzo films, not for everyone. He was involved with Jonah Hex, which is not a particularly loved film, and then Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance. Both those films are royally trashed. So he's done a few on his own, but you do wonder how he's got a job here. And here we have Jack Casey, who I know nothing about. I know nothing about most of the cast. Adeline Rudolph, she plays the offsider to Hellboy. So the start of it is it's an intriguing premise. So Hellboy and the Adeline Rudolph character are on a train, and it's a government train, and they're transporting this spider who possesses supernatural powers to be able to influence what's going on around. And the train passes through some part of Appalachia, in the mountainous region where every sort of American backwoodsman style deliverance movie is no doubt, the Winter's Bone area of America. And that triggers something in the spider to grow massively big, causes a carriage to derail. And the rest of the movie is the two characters, Hellboy and his offsider, Bobby, played by Adeline, traversing this godforsaken backwater of the Appalachian that looks like it's still in the 1930s. And they become aware that the first family they encounter, there's a possession going on in the family home. And they get dragged into a world of witches and the Crooked Man, who is a demonic force that has caused this particular mountain range to basically be under his spell for decades. And the whole area is full of witches and all this kind of stuff that's going on. The Crooked Man character I thought was very good. Martin Bassindale, almost a bit of a Mighty Boosh villain going on there. And also the Leia McNamara I thought was fantastic as probably the most focused on witch. It's very low budget compared to the other Hellboy films, and there are some massive missteps, but other than trying to relaunch it like they did with the previous film, I mean, how many $200 million Marvel films and DC films in a row are they pumping out that garbage? It is kind of refreshing to see something with such a small budget and also with such an unusual location for this kind of film. The Ozark sort of thing seems to be the realm of TV a lot, or it's to do with drugs, or it's to do, with poverty. Whereas seeing a comic book sci-fi film set in this world is actually really refreshing, and especially as they have to rely a lot more on sort of the one-on-one world as opposed to big shots and lots of special effects because they don't have any money. I found it quite entertaining and weird and odd, and I actually really like that about it. it's a bit off, like the Jack Kelsey version of Hellboy. It's impossible to get past the Ron Perlman's perfection of the role. And the last guy had that exact same thing. There's this uncanny valley going on where you're looking at him, but he sounds different when he talks, and you're kind of like... But I did think the newcomer Adeline Rudolph was very, very good, and so was Leah McNamara. And the baddie Martin Bassendale doesn't even have a Wikipedia entry. He does it just listed here. So they obviously used a lot of relatively unknown people, or at least sort of starting out people. I don't think Jack Casey's been in much either. He was in Deadpool 2, and replacing David Harbour in the last film. He was a much bigger name actor, actually. So he hasn't been in hardly any films I've seen. Baywatch. 12 Strong. I did like that film. I couldn't tell you who he was in it. So, yeah, he's been in a fair few films, but... The Killer as a salesman. I love The Killer with the David Fincher film from last year. I thought it was very underappreciated. But I just kind of dug the gothic atmosphere and the whole witchcraft and the vaguely True Detective sort of vibe about them going back to the Civil War era and there being these sort of demonic people about doing all manner of nasty stuff. And there is some really good scenes in it, actually. The ones where Hellboy is looking at his past and his mother, who's being tortured in hell, it was pretty well done, I thought. For like they used the budget really well there. It was quite visually impressive and quite disturbing. And I don't think they've covered that in any of the films at all. So his mother was supposed to be a witch that had relationships with one of the main demons in hell and so on, but they paint it slightly differently here, and it's quite jarring what's going on. So overall, I thought it was a good film. I didn't think it was a great film. I thought it had a lot wrong with it. Pacing-wise, it's often very dead. But how many crap $200 million DC and Marvel films have come out in the last 4 years? Against those, I thought it was better than Ant-Man 3. It was better than the Marvels. It was better than most of those films. So I'm going to give it a solid 7 out of 10 for Hellboy, the very unusual, The Crooked Man.